Over 4 grueling years, World War I raged across 6 continents, drawing in more than 100 nations and leaving over 40 million people, nearly 2.2% of the global population, dead or wounded in its wake. Empires lasting centuries collapsed while new powers rose. This is the World War I iceberg. Starting from the top, information is widely known, but as we go down, entries become more obscure, fringe, and mysterious. Before we dive in, a quick disclaimer that this video contains mentions of death, famine, disease, genocide, and things similar, but it is purely educational. If you do not feel comfortable with those topics, you should skip out on this video. With that out of the way, let's explore the World War I iceberg. What better way to start off this iceberg than with the event that sparked World War I? Born on December 18th, 1863, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne after Franz Joseph I. He was mostly known for his death, as he was assassinated on June 28, 1914 in a motorcade in Sarajevo, Bosnia, which up until then was under Austro-Hungarian rule. The assassin was Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old Bosnian Serb nationalist and a member of the secret group known as the Black Hand, which sought to unite all South Slavic peoples under Serbian rule. His death set off the July Crisis, which eventually led to Austria-Hungary sending an ultimatum to Serbia, which Serbia declined and thus led to Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia on the 28th of July 1914, setting off World War I. The Schlieffen Plan, named after Alfred von Schlieffen, who was a field marshal of the German Empire up until 1906, devised a strategic plan to avoid a two-front war by all means, by crushing France through Belgium very quickly and then turning to Russia. The thought behind it was that Russia would take much more resources and time to fully invade, and Russia would take a long time mobilizing themselves, giving precious time for the Western Front. However, Belgian resistance was very fierce and the invasion never really got to take large amounts of land quickly, as the Entente regrouped at the Marne, and by invading Belgium, Britain had entered the war, making resistance even fiercer. Post-war Germans blamed Moltke the Younger for being too timid in his invasion of Belgium, making the plan fail, as it was based on quick, decisive victories. But some say the plan was flawed from the start, as it brought Britain into the war, which likely wouldn't have joined if Belgium wasn't invaded in the first place. The Zimmermann telegram, sent on the 16th of January 1917 by the German Foreign Affairs Minister Arthur Zimmermann to the German embassy in Mexico City, it proposed an alliance between Mexico and Germany, where the US were to join the war on behalf of the Entente, Mexico would invade from the south. This would have distracted and tied up tons of resources from the European theater and opened up a new front. Mexico was promised its old territory it had lost in the Mexican-American War of 1846-47. Namely Texas, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. However, it was intercepted by British intelligence and shared to the US public, which turned public opinions harshly against Germany and was the main reason why the US joined World War I. The Christmas Truce. During December 24 to 26, 1914, when large parts of the Western Front, namely British and German soldiers, stopped fighting and entered an unofficial truce which, on some parts of the front, even lasted till New Year's Day. They sang Christmas carols, exchanged gifts, and even played football in no man's land. Later truces were attempted and some succeeded, but none were as widespread and impactful as the one in 1914. It was based on the whole mentality of live and let live, and a Scottish veteran said in an interview in 2003, "I remember the silence, the eerie sound of silence. Only the guards were on duty. We all went outside the farm buildings and just stood listening, and of course, thinking of people back home. All I'd heard for 2 months in the trenches was hissing, cracking, and whining of bullets in flight, machine gun fire, and distant German voices. But there was a dead silence that morning, right across the land as far as you could see. We shouted Merry Christmas, and even though nobody felt merry, the silence ended early in the afternoon and the killing started again. It was a short peace in a terrible war." This quote, for me, emphasizes the human side of war. As silly as that sounds, because there's nothing human about war. This just goes to show that even though war is terrible, there's a human side to it. Battle of the Somme. The Battle of the Somme was a British-French offensive on the Western Front in July to November 1916. Over 3.5 million men fought and over 1 million casualties were inflicted on each other. July 1st, the start of the invasion, became the bloodiest day in British military history, where Britain was inflicted 57,000 casualties on one day. September 15th marked the first years of tanks in history, where 49 tanks were used at Flers-Courcelette. Barely anything was gained from the offensive, other than the front line changing by a few kilometers, and it didn't crush the German army as the Entente hoped.
In the battles of Verdun and of the Somme in 1916, there were almost 2 million casualties, yet neither side won a decisive victory. No Man's Land became a symbol of the First World War's devastation.
Partly due to the deep defenses of multiple lines of trenches built by the Germans, and the fact that the Germans got intel of 2 British traitors of the offensive multiple weeks before it had actually started, letting the Germans get precious time to prepare for the invasion. The Armenian Genocide. In 1915 to 1917, the Ottoman Empire systematically deported and killed Armenians, stripped them of their valuables, led them on death marches into the dry deserts of Syria, and massacred them. Estimates range from 300,000 to 1.5 million Armenians dead. This discrimination against Armenians began much earlier and was rooted deep in Ottoman society, but mass killings were also happening decades before the war. The reason why is that the Ottoman leadership thought the Armenians were aiding the Russians on the Caucasus front and thought of them as parasites in need of being cleansed, which was completely unfounded. A big part of this is also the frustration of the Ottoman Empire, as they had been invaded at Gallipoli and were bogged down in the Caucasus Mountains. Many today see this as the first real genocide of the 20th century, a real tragedy of how brutal war can be. Rasputin's death. Grigory Rasputin was a mystic and faith healer born into a family of peasants on January 21st, 1869 in Siberia. In his early years, he went on long pilgrimages and left home for months or even years on end to visit holy sites in Russia. He is most known for his influence over the Tsarist family Nicholas II, regularly gaining access to their home quarters and having large influence over especially the Tsarina Alexandra. The noble saw him as corrupt and a dangerous problem, even blaming him for the economic downturn and losses in World War I. He was allegedly poisoned via cyanide but survived that, allegedly shot multiple times at close range and survived that, and then drowned in a river, eventually killing him, though this information is likely romanticized and he likely died to a bullet shot to his head. His death spread rapidly across Russia and signaled the collapse of the Tsarist regime and fed into revolutionary upset. Speaking of revolution, the Russian Revolution of 1917 was done in two phases, the February Revolution and the more famous October Revolution. The February Revolution saw peasants, workers, and mainly the garrison stationed in Petrograd clashing with the local police and seizing railways, important government buildings, and telegraph lines, announcing that the left-leaning Duma, which is a sort of parliament, is in control of the government. A few days later, Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate and an interim government was formed, signaling the end of monarchist rule in Russia, lasting 3 centuries. However, the government was insanely unpopular and weak, mainly due to not ending the war with the Central Powers and persecuting political opponents in the July days, culminating in the October Revolution, seeing the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seizing power. This started the Russian Civil War, which lasted until 1923 and saw the formation of the Soviet Union, and honestly goes so deep it deserves a video in its own right. I'm grossly oversimplifying. The Turnip Winter. Germany faced severe food shortages due to the British naval blockade and poor harvests in 1916. It is said that the naval blockade reduced food supplies by a staggering 66%. Turnips were then used as a main food source for the winter of 1916, leading to malnutrition, famine, and general civilian unrest, weakening the morale on the home front. Desperate for food, youth crime increased and the youth radicalized. According to historians, 80,000 children died to malnutrition in 1916 in Germany alone, and most likely contributed to radicalization post-war. Destroy this mad brute. This refers to a famous 1917 American propaganda poster depicting Germany as a huge gorilla carrying a bloodied club marked with the word Kultur, meaning culture, and abducting a woman, with the caption "Destroy this mad brute and enlist," urging young American men to enlist and join the war effort. Generally, propaganda in World War I was less used as a way to boost one's own image, but more so to dehumanize and discredit the enemy's image. Here it is depicting the enemy as barbaric, as a beast, and it's one of the most famous propaganda pieces of the 20th century. The 3 Secrets of Fatima. This is a huge rabbit hole and deserves its own video. In 1917, 3 Portuguese shepherd children reported visions of the Virgin Mary appearing to them, who revealed 3 secrets. The first secret was a vision of hell, with tormented souls burning. The second secret was that World War I would end, but another great war would start, probably alluding to World War II, as well as a request for Russia to convert to Catholicism. The third secret, which was only disclosed in the year 2000, described the persecution of Christians and an attack on a bishop dressed in white, which likely referred to the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II in 1981. Interestingly, Mary also told the children that a miracle would happen on October 13, 1917, which is known as the Miracle of the Sun, where 70,000 people gathered near the town of Fatima and saw the sun dance and make weird movements, and allegedly some people were miraculously healed. Today, the Catholic Church believes this to be an actual miracle by God, and the story of the 3 children is said to be of true origin. Lawrence of Arabia. Thomas Edward Lawrence, born in 1888, mostly known as Lawrence of Arabia, was working as an archaeologist in Syria just before World War I. As the war broke out, he was stationed in the Arab Bureau in Egypt, giving the British military intelligence against the Ottomans. In 1916, he was sent to Mesopotamia to advise and liaise with Arab leaders during the Arab revolt against Ottoman rule, naming with the Emir Faisal, king of Iraq. He was helping in key battles like the Battle of Aqaba in 1917, securing an important supply line, and gave the Arab revolt its first momentum. Or more famously, he was a part of the capturing of Damascus in 1918. Importantly, he felt betrayed after the French and British did not honor the independence promises for the Arab nations after the signing of the Sykes-Picot Treaty. After the war, he wrote his autobiography, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, his account of what he had experienced in World War I, which was the basis of the 1962 film Lawrence of Arabia, where he got the famous nickname from. PTSD soldiers. Known more famously as shell shock, is the psychological trauma soldiers were faced with from prolonged artillery fire and trench warfare. Symptoms include tremors, inability to speak, paralysis, tinnitus, lack of focus, and especially the 1,000-yard stare. At the time, the British Army put tens of thousands of soldiers on trial for these symptoms on the basis of cowardice. Of 3,080 death sentences, 266 were executed due to experiencing shell shock, and shows the mental distress the soldiers had gone through. The Gallipoli Campaign. The Gallipoli Campaign was an Allied campaign to capture the Dardanelles Strait and knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. The Allies agreed to the campaign due to Tsar Nicholas II asking for help, as they were bogged down in the Caucasus campaign.
Britain came up with a plan to defeat Germany by attacking its allies, Austria, Hungary, and what's now Turkey. Their goal was to take control of this area, called the Dardanelles. Ground forces were sent in at 3 main points. Many were actually British and French. Australians and New Zealanders made up just one of the landings, at a place we now know as Anzac Cove.
Beginning on the 19th of February 1915, Allied troops landed on multiple beachheads on the Gallipoli Peninsula, but were quickly stopped by the Ottoman resistance, and thus trench warfare ruled once again. Most notably, tens of thousands of Australians and New Zealanders were a part of the operation, known as the Anzacs, and incurred heavy casualties. Poor planning, inaccurate maps, and lack of experience, as well as lack of good equipment, led to the failure of the Allies taking the Bosporus Strait. Thus they had to evacuate bit by bit, and the last convoy withdrew on January 9th, 1916. The execution of the Romanov family. As said in the last year, the monarchy had been abolished in February 1917. This murder goes very deep and could very well fill its own video, but in essence, the Romanov family was moved from place to place as the Bolsheviks grew stronger, first from the Alexander Palace near Petrograd, to Tobolsk in Siberia, then finally to Yekaterinburg in 1917. In the night of July 17, 1918, the Romanovs, along with the physician Eugene Botkin, the maid Anna Demidova, the footman Alexei Trup, and the head cook Ivan Karatonov were ordered to the basement of the residence. And then a firing squad of the secret police were ordered in. With one swift order, the whole family was murdered on the spot. The bodies were then transported to a nearby forest, a pit dug, known as Ganina Yama, where most of the Romanovs were thrown in. The bodies covered with sulfuric acid and quicklime, and their faces smashed with rifle butts before they were finally buried. Most, if not all of their valuables on their bodies were stolen and then sold for money. But more on that on a later entry. The Soviets kept the massacres secret until the 1920s. Alexei and Maria were burned in a bonfire and their charred bones smashed with spades before being buried in a smaller separate pit. And all in all was very brutal, and the DNA was only confirmed in the 1990s, and now there are churches in the vicinity. Camel cavalry. Camel cavalry or cavalry was used instead of horses in the Middle Eastern theater of World War I, as they were better suited for the extreme climate, namely used for the transportation of supplies, equipment, and of course, soldiers. Both the Entente and the Central Powers used them, and the famous cavalry charge on the Suez Canal in 1915 is an overlooked part compared to the cavalry charges in Europe. Silent towns of the Western Front. Les villages détruits in French refers to the destroyed villages in northern France, namely destroyed during the Battle of Verdun in 1916. Lots of towns are not rebuilt in memory of the Allied men who died for France. Some of their soldiers have allegedly heard eerie ghostly voices or saw apparitions in these destroyed villages during and after the war. The soldier who let Hitler go. Henry Tandy, a British soldier, was stationed at the French village of Marcourt on the 28th of September 1918 and ran into a wounded German soldier as the battle neared its end. However, he decided to not shoot the soldier, sparing his life, and that soldier was allegedly Adolf Hitler. A painting was made of Tandy carrying a wounded soldier in 1914. It is dubious whether Hitler was that soldier, as it is reported that he was not in France at the time. However, when Neville Chamberlain visited Hitler in his holiday residency, Chamberlain asked about the painting which was hanging on the wall, and Hitler reportedly said, "That man came so near to killing me that I thought I should never see Germany again. Providence saved me from such devilishly accurate fire as those English boys were aiming at us." A reporter asking Tandy about his alleged encounter with Hitler said during the Blitz, "If only I had known what he would turn out to be. When I saw all the people and women and children he had killed and wounded, I was sorry to God I let him go." So, was that one soldier Hitler? Did Tandy have a chance at avoiding the greatest human tragedy in history? We may never know. Bela Kish. Bela Kish was born in Hungary in 1877 and was married twice and had 2 children. He had a dark secret though. He was a serial killer who killed 23 young women and 1 man, trying to pickle them in metal barrels with alcohol stationed on his property. Additionally, it was found that the bodies were drained of blood, and due to Kish having experiences with the occult, it is said that he might have been practicing vampirism. Kish was then conscripted in 1914, disappearing from his property and leaving it to his wife's care. His landlord, Maton Kaczynski, was inspecting the property, wanting to renovate it. Kish's neighbor, Bela Tokac, told the landlord that Kish had went to war. Tokac and Kaczynski were searching for reeds in Kish's workshop. However, they found another room next to his workshop, where they found the tin barrels lined up. After the landlord poked a hole in them, he was overwhelmed with the smell of death. He reported it to the military, but Kish was long gone. He was definitively last seen in a hospital in Serbia, but then vanished off the face of the earth. Rumors spread he was caught with burglary in Romania, contracted yellow fever in Turkey, fighting in the French Foreign Legion, and even seen in New York City in 1932. In the end, he was never apprehended and never seen again. The true number of victims is still unknown. A little side note, I was reading this at 3 in the morning and it really intrigued me. So it was one of the most crazy rabbit holes I've gone into for a while. Lost treasure of the Tsars. The Romanov family, the Russian dynasty lasting from 1613 to 1917, possessed a huge collection of royal regalia. The Soviets plundered their riches after the execution of the family and catalogued 773 items of precious value, of which 569 were sold to mainly Westerners after the Civil War, as to get hard cash to rebuild the country. Lots of items went missing in the midst of the Civil War, like the famous Fabergé eggs, Nicholas II's diamond-encrusted saber, and about 100 tons of gold, which to this day is missing and worth around 57 billion euros. It's probably at the bottom of Lake Baikal, but no one really knows. Much more might be missing due to the Soviets only being able to catalog what they had found. Soldiers and higher-ups were known to have taken jewelry from the royal family's possessions secretly, so the true number of jewelry missing is unknown. The USS Cyclops. The USS Cyclops was launched on May 7, 1910 by William Cramp and Sons, a Philadelphia-based shipbuilding company, and placed in service on November 7, 1910. In early January 1918, she sailed to Brazil to fuel British ships in the South Atlantic. On the 22nd of February, she set sail to Baltimore, Maryland, from Salvador, Brazil, carrying manganese ore which was used for ammunition, and no stops were scheduled along the way. However, the ship was overloaded, carrying more than 8,100 tons, more than her maximum capacity, and thus made an unscheduled stop at Barbados before leaving again on the 4th of March. This is the last documented time the ship was seen, as she did not reach Baltimore on the scheduled time of the 13th. However, she was allegedly seen by the Amalco, a ship sailing near it, on the 10th of March around Virginia. On the 1st of June 1918, Assistant Secretary of the Navy Franklin D. Roosevelt, yes, that Roosevelt, declared the ship officially lost. First, it was rumored the Germans sunk the ship, but they denied any involvement, nor did they even know of the ship's existence. Some rumor the ship was wrecked in the Bermuda Triangle, a region of the sea where ships mysteriously get lost without any explanation. However, more probable, a storm might have sunk the ship, or structural failure might have been at fault, especially due to the corrosive nature of some of the cargo she had carried on previous voyages. Lieutenant Commander George W. Worley, captain of the Cyclops, was known to have bouts of anger and violence, often cursing and berating officers and men for minor offenses. He would often let inexperienced men take charge of tasks and confined experienced men in their quarters. So many speculate Worley to have ill intent, or even be a traitor, handing the ship to the Germans, as he was pro-German. To this day, the wreck has never been found, and we may never know the true fate. The Spanish flu spread. Known by the 1918 to 1920 flu pandemic or Great Influenza epidemic, or more by the misnomer Spanish flu, was a global influenza pandemic. The first documented case was in March 1918 in Kansas, with further cases being recorded in France, Germany, in the UK in April. In 1920, nearly a third, or 500 million people had been infected. A total of 17 to 50 million people unfortunately died. Some put the death toll as high as 100 million, making it easily the deadliest pandemic in history. The reason for the flu being called the Spanish flu is that the press in the belligerent countries was censored to maintain high morale. The only country documenting cases was the Spanish media, thus creating the false illusion that the flu is of Spanish origin, but their geographic origin is unknown. In any case, 4 waves swept over the globe, some more deadly than others, and spread incredibly quickly due to the bad sanitation of the frontline trenches and general large troop movements, leading to the flu being brought to each corner of the earth, even in the Pacific. Anastasia's grave. As alluded to in the last tier, the Romanov family and their close circle was executed in 1918 by a firing squad. However, for around 20 years after the Tsar's grave was found, it was still unknown where Anastasia Romanov, the youngest daughter of the Tsar, was actually buried. Her grave, along with Alexei's, her brother, were not found. Over the years, many people have speculated Anastasia had survived the Civil War, and at least 10 women actually claimed to be Anastasia. The most famous imposter went by the name Anna Anderson and claimed to be Anastasia in 1920. She claimed she feigned her death among the bodies of her family and then escaped by a compassionate guard who let her go. In 2007, Russian archaeologists found the graves where Anastasia and Alexei were buried and inspected their DNA. The scientists could prove Anastasia was buried there, so all the imposters were lying for fame. I honestly may do a video on this in the future if you want to, so let me know in the comments. The Gallipoli Bayonet Charge. This is an entry I put in and refers to the mostly unknown Battle of the Neck, without the sea, fought on the 7th of August 1915. The Neck refers to a mountain pass on the Gallipoli Peninsula, which was an easily defendable position for both the Ottomans and the Entente, and developed into a stalemate in early 1915. In order to break the stalemate, Australian forces, 2 regiments from the 3rd Light Horse Brigade, the 8th and the 10th, readied up for an attack at 4 in the morning. Howitzers, field artillery, and supporting shore bombardment by destroyers tried to pin down Ottoman forces in the trenches. The plan was for the soldiers to charge into the enemy's trenches as soon as bombardment stopped, but due to miscommunication, the attack was done later than planned, leading to the Ottomans having ample time to prepare. Nonetheless, the first wave of 150 soldiers charged with their bayonets in the Ottomans' line of fire, all of them being mowed down within 30 seconds. But some of them were able to get into the enemy's trenches and waving flags, signaling the capturing of the trenches, but were killed afterwards. Another minute passed, and another wave of 150 men charged into the death, being killed without passing the halfway point. Seeing the flags being raised for success, the Australian commanders mistook this for success and ordered another wave of men forward. At 4:45 in the morning, another 150 men charged into their death. The 4th wave was fortunately called off, and out of a total of 450 men who attacked, 234 were killed and 138 wounded, while the Ottomans suffered an estimated of 12 casualties with nothing gained. I honestly find this case very interesting, as it shows the futility of it all. These men, after seeing the first wave perish, knew they were going to die, knew it was all for nothing. It is such a shame these men had to die like this. The Phantom Russian Army. In late August 1914, so a month after World War I started, rumors about a large Cossack army, Cossacks are Russian people, surfaced in Britain, first in local, then in national newspapers. Witnesses are said to have seen people wearing fur hats and speaking a strange foreign language in trains. Newspapers wrote that upwards of 1 million people were making their way through England to France to assist them in the Western Front. High military personnel heard about this and spread the myth even further. This then made its way to Germany, and they believed it. Anticipating the Russians, the Germans pulled off divisions from Belgium and went into more defensive positions, letting the Allies gear up for a massive offensive at the Marne. This honestly shows how easily people fell for propaganda in World War I. Like, they had no evidence to back any of this up. They literally just spread this rumor by word, and it worked. Destroyed heritage. Lots of historically significant structures were partially damaged or destroyed during World War I. This most famously includes the University Library of Leuven, which was destroyed in the Robe of Belgium in 1914. In a total of 230,000 volumes were lost. This also includes several French and Belgian villages, as explained in the earlier tier, like the city of Ypres, with its medieval town hall being destroyed, or the Reims Cathedral being destroyed due to shelling. Also, several of the 12th century gates of Baghdad were demolished by occupying Ottoman and Entente forces. Who shot the Red Baron? Manfred von Richthofen, known as the Red Baron, was born on the 2nd of May 1892 in Prussia, and was originally a cavalryman. When World War I broke out, he served in a reconnaissance unit on both the Eastern and Western Front, but was quickly dismounted, as trench warfare ruled the war. He then was ordered to transfer to the logistics department, but frustrated, he applied to the German Air Force, and was accepted, starting his service in May 1915. From then till September 1916, he was in pilot training. His first confirmed aerial victory was on the 16th of September 1916, where he had shot down a British plane in northern France, and, honoring his death, he pulled a silver cup engraved with the plane type and date of the battle. After his 16th confirmed kill, he was promoted to squadron leader of Jasta 11 and awarded the Blue Max, the highest military order at the time in Germany. To celebrate this, he painted his plane red, and it became known as the Flying Circus to the enemies. In April 1917, known as Bloody April to the British, he alone shot down 22 British aircraft, with a staggering of 4 shot down in a single day. However, he suffered a great head injury on July 6, 1917, causing disorientation, partial blindness, and even nausea after flying. On the 21st of April 1918, he suffered a fatal wound after pursuing an enemy fighter, killing him mid-air and crashing into the fields below. A British pilot by the name of Arthur Roy Brown was credited for the kill, but modern historians tell us that the Red Baron was likely killed by an anti-air machine gunner. It is thought that the Red Baron was likely suffering from lack of judgment, probably due to his head injury in 1917. As he should have known the risk of chasing a fighter while being over anti-air machinery. But today, it is not entirely clear who dealt the fatal shot, and it very well could have been artillery fire, Arthur Brown, or even the anti-air gunner. The Angel of Mons. In the Battle of Mons, heavily outnumbered British troops were being flanked and forced into a rapid retreat by the Germans in August 1914. It was the first big engagement of British troops in World War I, and thus it was very well perceived as a key moment in the British public. A Welsh author, Arthur McConn, wrote a short story about the battle and inserted fictitious elements in it, like the appearance of phantom bowmen from the Battle of Agincourt coming in to rescue British soldiers retreating. This story was then not perceived as fiction, as it should have been, but as fact, and thus the rumor spread about this divine intervention. The rumor evolved and morphed into supernatural angelic warriors instead of soldiers appearing, shooting at the German forces. This rumor spread faster than Arthur McConn could set the record straight, so it became a myth in British military history. The only real evidence is from the soldiers themselves, who recounted seeing phantom cavalrymen, but not bowmen or angels, and even appeared while retreating, not while fighting. This very well could be explained from hallucinations the soldiers suffered after days of not sleeping properly, but the actual story of divine providence is purely made up. Trench rats. The debris from constant artillery fire, lack of sanitation, corpses lying around, mud, food, and waste attracted millions of rats in trenches all across Europe. The rats would often live alongside the soldiers. They would crawl over them while attempting to sleep, burrow into food supplies, even eat the candles in sleeping quarters. Everywhere the soldiers were, the rats were too, and it is estimated the number of rats exceeded the number of soldiers by a long shot. Importantly, rats are nocturnal, meaning they were very annoying and posed a great nuisance while attempting to rest. Rats would also spread diseases, which proved especially bad with the Spanish flu raging, spread lice, and even gnaw on those who were asleep or wounded, leading to infections in even more wounded men. There was also a great psychological impact on these men. Living alongside rodents was not easy and not particularly great on the psyche, as you might expect. The worst part of these rats is that the soldiers would sometimes hear the rats nibbling on dead bodies in no man's land, which could not be retrieved, and that must have been a terrible experience. Lots of veterans record trench rats as being one of the worst things of trench warfare. Sergeant Stubby. Sergeant Stubby was a Boston Terrier who, in 1917, was wandering around the grounds where the 102nd Infantry Regiment 26th Yankee Division were training. One corporal was very fond of Stubby and smuggled him on board the ship moving to France after the US declared war on Germany. The commander found Stubby was smuggled on the ship, but let him stay. He served in the military for 18 months, participating in 4 offensives and 17 battles, improving morale and even saving American troops from an impending mustard gas attack. One time, Stubby even helped capture a German spy in the Argonne, and then was promoted to the rank of sergeant. He survived the war with 2 wounds, but is now America's most decorated war dog. The Cottingley Ferries. In 1917, 2 girls, Elsie Wright and Frances Griffiths, living in Cottingley, England, produced 5 photos allegedly showing proof of fairies. The photos captured public interest in 1920 after being published in a Christmas magazine. The initial responses were very mixed, some believing the photos to be authentic and some believing they were a hoax. But especially due to families losing their young men in war, people wanted to believe in the supernatural, making some believe in the authenticity. More of that though in a later entry. In the 1960s, the girls admitted the photos are faked and the fairies were staged with paper cutout of fairies in a popular kids book from the time. Though the girls say the 5th photo is genuine and not staged. So, does the 5th photo show something supernatural, or is it also a hoax? Mercy dogs. Mercy dogs, also called medical dogs, Red Cross dogs or ambulance dogs, are trained dogs that search the no man's land for wounded soldiers in need of immediate medical care. In World War I, they were outfitted with a first aid kit, water, and liquor. If a dog found a wounded soldier, the soldier could tend to their own wounds by using the supplies the dogs carried. If the soldier was too wounded to do so, the dog would take a piece of the soldier's uniform and go back and lead medical personnel to the wounded soldier. Some dogs were even trained to drag wounded soldiers to safety, or onto carts, and further beyond to medical bases. The dogs would also comfort mortally wounded soldiers before they died. It is difficult to find an exact number of mercy dogs used in World War I alone, but it is safe to assume it was around 20 to 30,000 dogs, saving thousands of lives. Mata Hari. Mata Hari, Indonesian for Eye of the Day, which was a stage name, was a Dutch exotic dancer who was convicted for being a spy for the Germans in World War I. She was born in the Netherlands and originally studied to become a teacher. She married a colonial officer stationed in the Dutch East Indies, today Indonesia, and moved there in 1897. Staying there till 1902. Here she came in contact with the art of Asian dancing. In 1905, she divorced her husband and moved to Paris, where she then worked as a dancer, often dancing in front of large crowds and even presenting herself naked in some shows. During this time, she made many connections, sometimes with high-ranking people in the government or military. In spring 1916, she was offered a considerable sum of money by a German officer for any information she passes to the Germans while she was traveling to France. Allegedly, she only gave old and useless information, but as she was in France, the French government imprisoned her for her spy activity. Mata Hari was then convicted of treason in a French court and sentenced to death by firing squad, which happened on the 15th of October 1917. The true motives remain unknown, but I am oversimplifying hard here, so this is not the full story. She remains as a femme fatale figure in history, a man-eater of sorts. The 5th Battalion of the Norfolk Regiment. On August 12, 1915, during the Gallipoli campaign, the 5th Battalion, known as the Sandringham Company, was ordered to attack Ottoman positions. At 4 p.m. they attacked the enemy positions, and around 250 men and 16 officers, along with Colonel Beauchamp, charged forward. That's the last time anyone had seen them alive, and it is said they simply vanished within the smoke of gunfire. These myths lasted for decades, since the Ottomans did not take any POWs. Modern investigations, however, point to the theory that these men were simply killed by machine gun fire and were not discovered until decades later, as recent archaeology shows. The Kiel Mutiny. So, a little backstory. After the 100 Days Offensive went horribly against the Germans, the Supreme Army Command announced in late September 1918 that the German government was about to collapse. At this point in time, Wilhelm II, the Kaiser, had little to no say in the German government anymore. The government itself was essentially a military dictatorship. This led the Chancellor of the Parliament to resign, and Max von Baden assumed power. Max von Baden then began with the negotiation of an armistice on the 5th of October. One of their demands was the immediate stop to submarine warfare. The head of the Navy did not like this at all, and on the 24th, ordered the commander of the High Seas Fleet, Admiral Hipper, to order a last-ditch attack against the British Navy. The soldiers stationed at Wilhelmshaven refused to attack and sail out for such a death voyage, a pointless attack that would not yield anything militarily and was just intended to save the Navy's pride and honor. The soldiers then took over Kiel and instituted a Workers' and Soldiers' Council, then helped them spread across Germany. This mutiny lasted from the 3rd to 11th of November 1918, which is Armistice Day, and brought down the monarchy in Germany and the eventual declaration of the Weimar Republic. French mutinies. Out of 20 million men in France, more than 1 million were killed from 1914 to early 1917. This weakened the army's morale and will to fight for futile death. General Robert Nivelle ordered the men stationed in North France to attack the River Aisne to deliver a decisive victory against the German positions. This, however, proved to be disastrous, as the offensive only conquered little strategically important positions at the cost of around 180,000 men. In spring 1917, the morale was low, and such a costly offensive did not bide well with the army as much as it did in 1914 to 15. Allegedly, around 40 to over 50% of the French army had mutineering or revolting soldiers during this time, refusing further suicidal attacks. This was followed by mass trials and mass arrests. 2,800 soldiers were sentenced to hard labor, and around 700 were sentenced to death, but only 49 were carried out. The scale and extent of the mutinies were kept secret for a while to maintain morale. It's honestly not widely known that mutinies occurred not only in Germany, but also in the Allied countries. It's an overlooked fact, and I believe that deserves more recognition. This was part 1 of the World War I Iceberg. Part 2 will follow whenever it's ready. Thank you guys for watching, and please leave feedback in the comments below, what you'd like to see next, or what you want improved. See you guys. Cheers.